Chapter 6. Heidi was waiting for Slade when he got home from work. She was wearing her favorite pair of old jeans, a button-down shirt, a cowboy hat, and a pair of cowboy boots. She'd added some curl to her long hair, and it was streaming down her back. Slade walked in and caught sight of her, grinning. "Let me shower and dress. I'll be ready in 20. "No rush," she told him. "I'd suggest you join me, but you look like you're ready to go out for the night, and I probably shouldn't smudge you." "Probably not." He sighed heavily, walking into the bathroom and throwing his scrubs off. He started the water in the tub to heat it up. "Next time wait and get ready when I do. You're taking half the fun out of the night." Half the fun was showering together? Well, that seems rather high. I mean, shouldn't half the fun be going to dance and riding the bull and the other half be making love when we get home? He seemed to consider it for a moment. "You're probably right. But the shower would have been fun. I'm sure we'll get sweaty while we're dancing," she reminded him, shutting the bathroom door from the outside. True to his word, he was ready 20 minutes later, dressed very similarly to her. He was even wearing a green checkered shirt like hers. "We match." Heidi nodded. "We do. I'm not sure if one of us should change, or if we should just go ahead and go." He shrugged. "I don't know, but I'm taking you out for the best steak you've ever had, and then we're going to dance." "Sounds good to me." He was right about the steak. She had never had one quite so tender. "This really is amazing." She looked at him across the table as she bit into the meat. He smiled. "Yeah, I went through a long series of first dates, and no one was willing to go on a second one with me. I found this when I was looking for a new place to try with one of them." She grinned. "Because you look at naked women all day." He sighed. "I'm glad it doesn't bother you." "Of course, why would it? You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Next to them, you're Aphrodite." "Oh, you really are trying to butter me up for something. What exactly do you want?" He shook his head, grinning. "Not a thing. I just think you're really special and want you to know it." She couldn't help but smile at him. "I feel like you want something, but I'll leave it at that." He shrugged. "Not this time." He nodded to the phone beside her plate. "Are you on call this weekend?" She nodded. "My on-call is different than yours, though. I need to arrange for someone to cover a shift if anyone calls in, but I rarely have to go in myself unless we have several people out. We had a stomach bug a month ago, and it was awful. Vicky and I were both covering extra shifts every time we turned around." "But that shouldn't happen this weekend?" "It shouldn't. I can't promise anything, of course. You never know when everyone is going to get sick. And they all do it at the same time. Every single time. It makes me crazy." "Well, we'll make the most of having time off together when we can. Do you want to make plans for tomorrow or just lounge around at home?" She shrugged. "My parents are dying for us to come over for dinner, so they can get to know you better. I'm not sure that's what I want, but they want it." "Are we ready for that?" he asked. "Should we put them off for another week or two? You won't be on call next weekend." She grinned. "I like the way you think. Then we can have one more weekend alone together before other people start making demands on us." "What other people?" "Your parents and?" "Several of my friends want us to get together with them, which will be a little weird. They all have kids or are currently pregnant. We'd be the only newlyweds, but it's better than being the only single person with them, right?" He laughed. "Right. We'll wait till later for that too. Like not next weekend, but the next weekend you're not on call." Heidi grinned. "Sounds good to me. I do want you to get to know them, but my parents need to come first, because I swear my mom is about to wet herself, she's so anxious." I've talked to her 4 times this week, and she's always sure I've been murdered. She's still not convinced I'm not going to kill you in your sleep? He shook his head. If I was going to murder you, I'd have done it that first night. I mean, why prolong it? I get too attached when I live with a woman for a week before I kill her. It makes no sense. I'll tell her you said so. Slade frowned. Better not. I don't think she'd appreciate my humor. Heidi shook her head. Not even a little bit. He sighed. More people in this world need to appreciate my humor. I'm a funny guy. Sure. A laugh a minute. I don't know how your patients have time to push when they're so busy laughing. I should have been a comedian. Less student debt and more recognition. I could see it, Heidi said with a straight face. I would laugh and laugh at your humor. He made a face at her. You're supposed to be supportive of my every dream. I don't remember promising that when I married you. You have no idea what you promised me. You were too busy staring off into space. You couldn't even remember to say, I do. Admit it. Heidi blushed, looking down at her plate. I'll admit nothing of the sort. I was paying attention to every word. Then why did I have to remind you to say, I do? Explain that one. I was contemplating whether you were worthy of me saying it to. I mean, for all I knew you were a mass murderer. Slade sighed, rubbing his head. Are we back to that? Heidi shrugged. I was never there. It was my mother. Uh-huh. They finished eating, and he paid for their meal, glancing down at his phone. We might actually have a whole date night. Heidi grinned. Wouldn't that be fun? I hope so. I'm trying to make it fun. He stood, and they left the restaurant together. The bar is about a block from here. Do you want to walk or drive? Heidi looked up at the sky, which had darkened while they were eating. It's a gorgeous night. Let's walk. He took her hand in his, and they walked through the downtown area of Fort Worth together. We need to go to the water gardens sometime. Not this weekend. Too much is going on. I know, but soon. He looked over at the entrance, thinking they should have had wedding pictures done there. Oh well, it was too late now. So are you still maintaining that you can ride on a mechanical bull while standing up? She asked. Do I need to make sure I have a first aid kit ready? Not at all. I promise, I've done it 1,000,000 times. A million? Okay, not 1,000,000. Probably 100, though. When they got to the bar, the guy at the door grinned. Slade. Good to see you, man. Are you going to put on a show for us tonight? Nope. Just for my bride here. She doesn't think I can ride a mechanical bull standing up. The man shook his head. You have no idea what this man can do. He's pretty darn incredible. Then he looked back at Slade. I should have known you'd marry a pretty lady. Slade smiled. The prettiest lady in all the land, you mean? Sure, man, sure. The prettiest lady in all the land. Whatever. He shook his head when Slade pulled out his wallet. Never a charge for you. Slade led Heidi to a small table near the mechanical bull, which no one was using. He promptly took off his boots and walked toward the machine. Another man who Slade tried to give his money to held up both hands, and refused it. No way. You make this thing look like a toy. No money from you. Slade carefully mounted the bull. He hadn't tried this in a few years, but he knew it would all come back. He'd done it so often that he couldn't imagine not being able to. The band song ended, and Slade heard the owner of the bar's voice, and he couldn't help but grin. Ladies and cowboys, you are in for a real treat tonight. My friend, Slade Henderson, is taking a break from being a bigwig doctor and returning to his roots. Please gather round the bowl, because I can promise you, you have never seen anything like what you're about to see from this man. He pulled on the cord from the microphone till it barely reached into the padded area where the bowl was. I have to know what brought you back here, Slade. Slade smiled, his face dimpling. I got married last weekend, and when I talked to my bride about my bull riding skills, she told me that not only could I not ride a bull on my feet, but that no one could. Now, I don't like to prove the pretty lady wrong, but I think I sure might move up a notch in her beautiful green eyes if I show her what I can do. So, I'm going to show her how a real man rides a bull. The owner took the microphone back, a huge grin on his face. Fair enough. Get your phones out, people. You're going to want video of this. Heidi stood at the edge of the small arena, with her heart in her throat. She didn't want him to get hurt, and she knew he was doing it just for her. She opened her mouth to shout to him that she believed him just as they started the bull. To her amazement, he went from sitting on the bull's saddle correctly to standing in a second flat. And then the owner nodded to the band and they played Boot Scootin' Boogie. While the song played, he did a dance to it, his thumbs mostly tucked in his belt, but occasionally, he'd raise a hand to wave his hat in the air. Heidi was thankful the bull never went faster than the slow speed they started it out at, because she was certain she'd have had a heart attack. At the final words of the song, the bull drifted to a stop, and Slade did a no-handed flip right off the end of the bull to land at Heidi's feet. He took both her hands in his, a bit out of breath from his dance. Well, sweetheart? Do you believe me now? Heidi wasn't sure if she wanted to beat him with her hat for being so stupid or if she wanted to cheer that he'd done so well. So she did neither. She flew at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him for all she was worth. I was sure you were going to fall and break your fool neck. Nah. I fell a couple of times practicing, but never since I learned what I was doing. She shook her head at him. You don't do that often, do you? It's been a few years. Please don't ever do it again. He laughed. But there's another song I do. I can't just do one and not the other. Yes, you can. She grabbed his hand and pulled him far from the bowl. I thought you were going to dance with me. All right. Let me get my boots back on. He walked to the table and pulled his boots back on before taking her hand and leading her to the dance floor. It was an old, slow Garth Brooks song and a favorite of hers, If Tomorrow Never Comes. While they danced, he sang it to her softly, and she stared at him. You can sing? He threw back his head and laughed. There's so much you don't know about me yet, Heidi. We'll get there. After the dance, the owner came to him, hat in hand. Thanks for the show. You always get so much business for the bull. How about a song? Just one while the singer gets a drink. His throat's been bugging him today. Slade thought about it for a moment. Would you mind? He asked Heidi. She shook her head. I would love it. Not nearly as dangerous as the bull. I'll do Austin by Blake Shelton. Slade winked at Heidi before he got to his feet and walked over to join the band. The singer patted him on the back and wandered off while he told the others what song he'd sing. As Heidi watched, he climbed on the stage and took the microphone. He waited a moment as the band started the song, and then he sang. His voice, his pure baritone voice, had Heidi's knees turning to mush. How many doctors sang to their wives in bars on Friday nights? When he finished the final words of the song, the applause was thunderous. Heidi was on her feet with everyone else, clapping wildly. When Slade returned to the table, her eyes were wide. You're not just any doctor. You're super doctor. He laughed. I'm more than you think I am. I'm just going to leave it at that. Don't paint me with the same brush you use on all the other doctors you've known, Heidi. Buy me my own. I'm starting to really believe that. All I ask is you keep an open mind as you watch me, and not some freak who did a friend wrong or treated nurses like idiots. I'm not them. I'm doing my best. Heidi couldn't completely shake her preconceived notions about doctors, but she was trying. For him. She was starting to think she'd do anything for him. He already held her heart in the palm of his hand, she only wished she could trust him with it. They danced several more dances, and she found he was as good at fast dancing as he was slow dancing. You must have led a crazy wild life in college. He shrugged. I was never a drinker, but my friends all liked to drink, so I'd go with them to bars, and I'd drive them home. I learned a lot of dances. I learned to watch people and understand them. I almost went into psychiatry. She wrinkled her nose. I can't see you as a shrink. I'd have been a good one. No doubt. You seem to be good at everything you do. She reached out and took his hand while they waited for another refill on their soft drinks. This is a fun place. The bar wasn't huge, but it was hopping. It was just right for Heidi's tastes. After they'd finished their drinks, they paid, and Slade stood up. Let's get you home. The owner came over and shook Slade's hand, thanking him for coming in. You know we'd hire you in a heartbeat if you ever got sick of being a doctor. Slade laughed. Yeah, I could sing from the back of a moving mechanical bull while dancing. Maybe I could tell jokes. His eyes lit up. I was just telling Heidi that I'd make a great comedian. The owner shook his head. Don't quit your day job. He winked at Heidi, who laughed. It was really nice meeting you, Heidi said, leaning into Slade as he put his arm around her. This place showed me a whole new side of my husband. You take care of my friend. He's a good man. Heidi nodded. He is. I think I'm going to keep him. The owner threw back his head and laughed, patting Heidi's shoulder. As soon as they were outside, Slade said, Too bad he didn't realize you were serious. I'm sorry I judged you based on every other doctor I've known. She still wasn't sure that she trusted him completely, but that day had opened her eyes to a different man than she'd thought she knew. Have you ever dated a doctor? Heidi sighed, nodding. Fresh out of college, starting my career, I worked as a nurse in a local hospital. I'm not going to say which one, because it really doesn't matter at this point. One of the residents started following me around on his breaks, telling me everything I did was perfect. He'd compliment me on so many different things. And I finally agreed to go out with him. I believed that he saw me as a woman and not just a nurse to boss around. She sighed. We'd been dating for about 3 weeks when he messed up. He hadn't had enough sleep, and he wrote an order wrong. I caught it. I very quietly showed him his error, so he wouldn't be embarrassed. He insisted he was right. What happened? Heidi sighed. I refused to give the medication to the patient as he'd written it. I couldn't kill her. Of course not. I went to the charge nurse and told her what happened, and he got reprimanded. And he screamed at me in front of everyone that I wasn't worth anything anyway, and we never went out again. Slade shook his head. I wish doctors could just skip right over the full of themselves years and right on to knowing what they're doing. If I knew half what I thought I knew when I was an intern, I'd be the best doctor alive. Heidi nodded, surprised he was agreeing with her. So if I pointed out your medication error, what would you do? I'd recheck my calculations. If you were right, I'd thank you profusely for bringing it to my attention. If you were wrong, I'd thank you for thinking of the patient first. You would not. She'd never seen a doctor react that way. She knew better. I would. Because it would mean to me that you are caring more about the life of a patient than how you're going to be treated by a doctor with his head up his butt. I know how nurses are treated. I've worked in hospitals for a long time. And my mother is still a nurse. She frowned. I forgot your mom is a nurse. Would she ever come home with stories about doctors? Oh yeah. When I first said I was going to be a doctor, I think she was upset, but as time went by, she just talked to me about always doing the right thing for the patient and about making sure I treated everyone as my equals. She said there's a hierarchy in hospitals, but there shouldn't be. Heidi looked at him. And you believe it? He shrugged. I probably came out of medical school with an ego bigger than I should have, but not as bad as some of my classmates. I tried not to be an egomaniac. They'd reached the car and got in. I really had a lot of fun tonight. It was interesting to see another side of you. Which side was better? The bull dancing side or the singing side? I liked the singing side better, because I wasn't worried you'd fall and break your full neck. I have to admit you looked really hot on that bull, though. I was very impressed. Hot, huh? So I turned you on? She shook her head. Slade Henderson, you turn me on every time you look at me. Yes, your bull riding turned me on, but so did dancing and singing. So now that you're so turned on, we're going straight home, and you're going to show me, right? She laughed. Sometimes I think you're this almost superhuman man, who can do anything. And then you say something like that, and I realize that deep down, you're just a hormonal teenager trying to get laid like every other man in the country. Well, yeah. What did you really expect? I have no idea. Chapter 7. Heidi and Slade met the movers at her old apartment the following weekend. While Heidi was checking on Miss Molly, Slade was upstairs, directing the movers. Not that he'd ever been there before to do much directing. Heidi knocked on the door. Hi, Miss Molly. How are you doing? It's been days since you came to see me. I'm so sorry. I know it's been a while, but I just got married and I don't live upstairs anymore. Heidi felt guilty for not seeing her more, but she truly didn't have time to drive out of her way to stop in every day. Well, I know, but I thought you'd still come see me. Heidi smiled. I will. And if there's anything you need from me, all you have to do is call. I need something. Heidi wasn't surprised. What do you need today? I need to go to the grocery store. That young lady who's supposed to do those things for me has disappeared. Heidi frowned at that. Well, let me call my husband real quick and tell him we're going to the grocery store. She pulled her phone out and called Slade. Miss Molly needs to go to the grocery store. I'm going to drive her. I thought you said she had someone who was paid to take care of little things like that. She disappeared. I'll check into it, but first, I'm going to get her grocery shopping done. Call me when you get back, and I'll carry the groceries in. You're such a gentleman. I try. Heidi smiled at Miss Molly. All right. Are you ready? The old woman shuffled to the door, grabbing her walker from beside it. I'm not feeling as spry as usual today, Heidi. Do you mind if I use the motorized cart? Heidi knew the woman's driving would make her the terror of the entire store, and she was already dreading it. Of course not. Just make sure not to run over my feet this time. You run over someone's feet a few times. 16, Miss Molly. You've run over them 16 times. Are you counting? When your feet get crushed by a motorized cart, you tend to remember it. No counting necessary. Heidi closed and locked the older woman's apartment. She'd have to call her daughter again. Once they were in Heidi's car, she drove the mile up the road to the grocery store Miss Molly preferred. Did you make a list? Heidi asked, hoping against hope they wouldn't be going up and down every single aisle on a Saturday. No, I thought we'd just look around. I haven't been out in over a week. Heidi smiled at her, knowing she couldn't begrudge the woman her only time out of the apartment. Let me drive one of the carts over, so you can use it. Open your car door so it's not too hot for you. She jogged up to the building and sat down in one of the carts. She'd always hated driving them, but she'd do anything for her sweet neighbor. Miss Molly waited until Heidi got out of the cart, then she climbed in. I wish we could find someone to race with. Now, Miss Molly, you remember what happened the last time you tried to race someone in the grocery store? There must have been 75 broken jars of pickles, and they said you weren't allowed to come back to their store again. That's why we had to start shopping here. One little incident. That was not a little incident. That was a big incident. No racing. Just a little racing? Grocery shopping should be fun, Heidi. No, it shouldn't. If you challenge other people to a race, I'll have to take your cart away and push you in one of the old-fashioned wheelchairs, and we both know how much you hate those. You wouldn't do that to me. If you can't behave, I'll have to. Don't make me play the mean guy. I don't like it, but I'll do it if I have to. Miss Molly just frowned. So tell me about this new husband of yours. Is he sexy? Heidi nodded, laughing. He's a real hottie. I have a picture. She had taken a picture of him on the stage the night before, and they'd done several selfies. Wanna see? Of course I do. I love to drool over a good hunk as much as the next woman. I may be old, but I'm not dead. Heidi pulled out her phone and pulled up a picture of her and Slade together on their wedding day. I'm still waiting on the photographer's pictures, but this is one I took. He is a hunk. And look at you in your wedding dress. I don't think you've ever looked prettier. Heidi took her phone back and shoved it into her purse. She took a sale ad from the stack and handed it to her friend, knowing she loved to peruse the sales, even though she'd never buy anything from it. They went up and down every single aisle in the store, some of them 2 or 3 times. Miss Molly greeted several people by name. She truly loved her trips to the grocery store. Heidi wished she had time to take the woman shopping every week, because even though it wasn't her favorite thing to do, she knew it was a big deal to Miss Molly. I'm going to text my husband and let him know we're on our way back. He'll meet us at your place to carry the groceries in. I get to meet him today? Can I call him hunk? Heidi laughed. I'm not sure how he'd react to that. His name is Slade Henderson. He's a doctor. A doctor? Well, look at you, marrying a doctor. Is he as fun to kiss as he looks? Those eyes of his make me think that he's got some mischief in him. There's a lot hidden in those brown eyes. Heidi pulled up in front of the apartment building and smiled when she saw Slade waiting for them. She got out and hurried around to open the door for Miss Molly, while pushing the button to pop the trunk. If you'll put the groceries on her counter, I'll put them away. Slade nodded. They're almost done packing up your apartment. They're going to break for lunch, then we'll meet at the house. Sounds good. Heidi gripped Miss Molly's arm and carefully helped her out of the car. She handed her the walker and hurried over to unlock the apartment door. You sit down, and we'll get the groceries taken care of, then I'll fix you a nice lunch. What are you hungry for? Miss Molly made a face. There's never anything good to eat in my apartment. Heidi frowned at the older woman. Now, don't you start that. We just got back from the grocery store. But you wouldn't let me race Bob Murphy, and he challenged me. Remember the pickles? Slade walked up behind Heidi with his first load of groceries. Is that like Remember the Alamo? No, because that was the rally cry for vengeance. This is the rally cry for not acting like toddlers. Miss Molly sank into her recliner and pushed her walker at Heidi, who immediately set it next to the front door where her friend preferred it. You never let me have any fun. I could never move into that nursing home of yours, knowing you'd be watching my every move. Heidi leaned down and kissed the older woman's weathered cheek. You know I'd take good care of you. It was a perpetual argument for them. Heidi wished the older woman would at least move into their assisted living apartments, because then she knew she'd be watched over. Her daughter kept hiring incompetent idiots to help her. There's a nice little apartment on the first floor in the assisted living. I'd be happy to drive you over and show you around. Miss Molly frowned. Maybe. Heidi was shocked by the answer. She'd never gotten her to even agree to a maybe. What's changed your mind? The older woman's eyes filled with tears. Without you living upstairs, I don't know what's going to happen to me. Slade came back in and found Heidi hovering over her friend. I can't promise to make it by every day like I used to, but if you were in the assisted living, I could see you just about every day. And I would make sure to assign my very best people to you. Maybe we could go look at it on Monday. Heidi's mind raced, and she finally nodded. She'd find a way to make it work. Vicky would certainly understand. I'll come by and pick you up in the morning. Miss Molly shook her head. No, you're too grumpy in the mornings. Come after lunch. Heidi bit her lip, trying to hide the laughter. You need to meet my husband, Miss Molly. You're going to like him a lot. Her eyes met Slade's, and she knew he'd heard a lot of the conversation. Come meet one of my favorite people in the whole world, Slade. This is Miss Molly. Slade walked over and stood beside Heidi, one arm going around her as he offered his hand to shake. I've heard so many good things about you. Well, I'm glad she's not just talking about me running over her feet and that horrible pickle incident. You won the lottery when you married this one. Slade looked over at Heidi, the smile lighting up his whole face. I know I did. Heidi stood on tiptoes and kissed him. Isn't he just the sweetest, Miss Molly? He is. And I never got a chance to kiss the groom. Or pinch his bottom. Get over here, you big hunk. Heidi looked at Slade, laughing, wondering what he'd do. He leaned down and kissed Miss Molly's cheek before turning to present his butt for her to pinch. When she did, he jumped a bit, saying, "Oh," and the older woman giggled. Heidi smiled her thanks. Did you get all the groceries? He nodded. I'm going to get back upstairs. How much longer will you be? I'm going to cook a nice lunch for Miss Molly, and then I'll be ready. I'll come back down when we're done. Thank you. After he'd gone, Heidi looked down at Miss Molly. Now, what do you want me to make you for lunch? How about a tuna casserole? I've been hungry for one for days. Absolutely. Heidi went into the kitchen and started boiling water. She could handle the extra heat for a few minutes for Miss Molly. Slade came down 30 minutes later, just as she was serving the food in a bowl and putting it on a TV tray. She placed a flower she'd purchased at the store in a vase, then added it to the tray to spruce up the meal. She knew how much the little things meant to Miss Molly. Are you set? I do need to go finish this move with Slade, but I'll come and get you Monday so you can see the assisted living apartment. Does that sound good? Miss Molly nodded. Well, it doesn't really sound good, but I know I need the help, and that rotten daughter of mine isn't going to be here for me. I know. But I can see you just about every day and take much better care of you there. Heidi leaned down and kissed Miss Molly's cheek. I'll see you Monday. You two have a good weekend. Heidi turned at the door and waved, hating to leave her like that, but knowing she had to. She and Slade had brought separate cars in case he got called away. Don't you have any babies due this weekend? Actually, it's weird. I've had babies due every week for months, and I have this 3-week stretch with no babies due. Now, because I said that, someone will deliver early. Heidi grinned. Well, let's take my car, and we'll go eat. He held his hand out for her keys. I'll drive. My car. I get to drive. He frowned. No, I'll drive. You don't think I can drive, do you? It's not that I don't think you can drive. Then what is it? Heidi frowned at him. I don't let anyone drive me. I don't like giving up control. She put her hands on her hips. So I finally found the chink in my knight's armor? He's a control freak? I work for myself for a reason. I'm a benevolent dictator, but I'm definitely a dictator. But marriage is a partnership. Slade nodded readily. Of course it is. But I'm still driving. Heidi glared at him, but handed him her car keys. You aren't always going to win, you know. I know. I'll just savor every little victory. They stopped for lunch, and he let her choose the place. An hour later, they were pulling into the driveway of the house, barely beating the movers. Heidi had to supervise this part of things, because some things were going to storage, and some were being moved into the house. It was a long, tiring day, but they finished. Her call phone rang at 3, and she had to excuse herself. This is Heidi. Heidi, this is Laura. My daughter has a stomach bug, and I'm not going to make it in tonight. I hope she feels better. Thanks for letting me know. Heidi pulled her list of PRNCNAs toward her, looking down for the name of the person she knew was most likely to be willing. Technically, she was supposed to start at the top, but she believed in rewarding people who were willing to go in whenever called. She called Miranda first. Miranda, it's Heidi. We have someone out tonight, and I was hoping you could cover for her? Absolutely. With Jack being unemployed, I need all the hours I can get, and he can watch the kids. Thank you. Shift starts at 4. You're working for Laura. I'll be there. I'll let Mary know. She's in charge tonight. Heidi said, ending the call and calling Mary. Laura's out sick, but Miranda is taking her place. Oh, good. Miranda's a hard worker. I'll take her any time someone is out. I like working with her too, which is why she's always the first one I call. Thanks for letting me know. No problem. Heidi ended the call and hurried back to help direct the movers. Slade looked over at her. Do you want me to go and supervise while they put everything in storage? Heidi shook her head. No, they'll put whatever's left in there, and I gave them the combination. I'm not worried about it. She stifled a yawn. I'm just glad this is almost over and we'll have a whole day off tomorrow. Of course, she'd spend half the day unpacking. What do you want to do with it? She made a face. Other than unpacking boxes? I don't know. Maybe we could just stay home and grill out for lunch. Swim. I'd like that. Time with my wife is always the answer. Did you get your personnel problems taken care of? She nodded. One of my CNAs has a kid with a stomach bug. There's one who is always willing to fill in, though, so it was 2 quick phone calls and done. Sounds like that was easy. This time. She grinned at him. What do we want to do for dinner tonight? I don't want to get out, but I don't want to heat up the house either. He shrugged. Why don't I make some dogs on the grill? We can have dogs and chips. Not the healthiest meal in the world, but it won't heat up the house, and we don't have to go anywhere. We can even cook in our bathing suits. Sounds good to me. Asterisk. The rest of the weekend passed uneventfully, and Heidi couldn't believe how easily she was settling into marriage, with a doctor, of all people. She watched Slade constantly, expecting him to turn into a domineering jerk, but so far, it just wasn't happening. On Monday morning, she went to work as usual, keeping in mind that she'd promised to fetch Miss Molly after lunch. How's married life? Vicky asked from the door to Heidi's office. Heidi looked up with a grin. I never thought being married to a doctor could make me happy, but I was wrong. Vicky smiled at that. I'm really glad. I need a long lunch today. Heidi quickly explained about Miss Molly. I told her I'd pick her up after lunch. So what I thought I'd do is go get her, drive her up here to see the assisted living area, then take her back. I can grab lunch on the way. You need something healthier than tacos on occasion, Heidi. I had burgers and potato salad yesterday. Vicky shook her head. You need to slow down sometimes. Right. Just like you do? I feed my family a real meal most nights. I ate a steak on Friday. All right. I'm done talking. Anything happen over the weekend I need to know about? Heidi shook her head. Laura called in sick kid. Miranda covered for her. God bless Miranda, Vicky responded. She makes it so easy to cover those CNA shifts. I know. It's going to be tough when her husband finds a job. Okay, I'm going to let you get back to your paperwork. Heidi nodded, already looking down at the form in front of her. She hated paperwork almost as much as she hated mornings. She was still at it an hour later when she saw something that had her jumping up and running for the door. Mrs. Nelson, who had been a resident since before Heidi started working there 6 years before, was wandering down the hall. It wouldn't be unusual, except that Heidi had only seen Mrs. Nelson in her bed or a wheelchair. She'd assumed the woman couldn't walk. She walked next door to Vicky's office. Why was Mrs. Nelson just wandering down the hall? Vicky looked up from her computer, rubbing the back of her neck absently. Mrs. Nelson? Oh, she can walk. She just kept throwing herself on the floor, not wanting to walk, so we got her a wheelchair. She walks when she feels like it, but that's the only time. Heidi blinked a few times. Why didn't I know this? Because she doesn't usually feel like it. Vicky shook her head. There's nothing wrong with her legs or her balance. She tends to wander around a lot in the middle of the night. Should we add working with her on walking to her care plan? Absolutely not. She throws herself on the floor and has a fit worthy of any toddler. Nope. We'll just keep doing what we're doing. If she wants to walk, she can. If she doesn't, we'll let her ride around in her wheelchair. Heidi nodded. She understood completely. Once a patient was on the floor, it was hard to get them up, and Mrs. Nelson was one of the most stubborn women she knew. All right. She really freaked me out for a minute there. You might want to follow her. She gets tired of walking and sits down wherever she is, and then she needs a wheelchair to get back to where she's supposed to be. She was dressed, I hope? Heidi nodded. Yeah, she was dressed. I have no idea where she was going, but I'll try to find her. 5 minutes later, she was glad she'd taken Vicky's advice. Mrs. Nelson was sitting on the floor in the lobby, complaining about someone pushing her out of her wheelchair loudly to anyone who would listen. Thankfully, no one was listening. I'll get your wheelchair for you, Mrs. Nelson. She was on the floor beside a comfortable chair. Let me help you into a chair while I go get one. Mrs. Nelson nodded, taking Heidi's hand to be helped up. She sat in the chair and folded her hands on her lap, waiting for her chair. Instead of going to get one herself, Heidi had the receptionist page a CNA with a wheelchair for Mrs. Nelson. Jenny was there a minute later, pushing a wheelchair. I wondered where you'd wandered off to, Mrs. Nelson. You know you're not supposed to just walk off. You pushed me out of my wheelchair and left me, Mrs. Nelson argued belligerently. Of course. Jenny helped her into the chair and pushed her back down the hall. It's almost time for lunch. Do you want to sit with your friends today? The last thing Heidi heard as they disappeared around the corner was, you know I don't have any friends. Why do you always make up stories? Heidi shook her head. It was going to be a long day. Chapter 8. Miss Molly was waiting for her when Heidi drove up. Are we going to use a wheelchair when we get there, or do you think you can handle it with your walker? My knees are feeling young today. I can do it. Heidi smiled at that. Good. If you change your mind, I can arrange for a chair, but it's good for you to walk when you can. Once Miss Molly was settled in the car, Heidi headed toward the nursing home. Do you have any questions before we get there? Yes, are there other people who I can do things with there? Absolutely. There are always people down in the lobby putting puzzles together and playing cards. There's a big television, and you'd have people to watch your stories with. I think you'll really like it. But I'll have my own space? Yes, you will. Your apartment will be a one-bedroom with a kitchen, bathroom, and living room. We'll set up a schedule for people to check on you. You don't have to be around people unless you want to, but if you want to, you can. It's that simple. You'll have a whole community of friends in no time. Miss Molly sighed. I hoped it would never come to this. I know you did, and if I could have stayed living in my little apartment above you forever, we'd have been able to hold off a lot longer. But you need more help than I can give when I'm not living that close to you. Here, you'll always have help if you need it. There will be a number you can call if you fall or if you just need someone to run to the store for a gallon of milk. Heidi pulled into the parking lot and hurried around the car, handing Miss Molly her walker. I don't want you to be challenging the other residents to races, though. Do you understand me? Miss Molly just grinned. I won't have to if they can keep me entertained. Good golly, Miss Molly. You need to learn to entertain yourself. Miss Molly just giggled as they walked the few steps to the lobby. Heidi had already arranged for the tour, so she had Miss Molly sit and wait while she parked in an appropriate space. She was back beside her friend 2 minutes later, and she saw that Miss Molly had already struck up a conversation with Opal, one of Heidi's favorite residents. Hello, Miss Opal. I see you've met my friend, Miss Molly. I didn't know her name, but yes, we met. She plays spades, so she needs to move in here, because I need a good spades partner. Jasper tries, but the old goat can barely see the cards, and I need someone as good as I am. Of course you do, Miss Opal. Do you want to show Miss Molly your apartment? We're going to see an empty one, but she might like to see how nice they look when they're decorated like yours is. Heidi didn't really need Miss Molly to see Opal's apartment, but she knew that if the two became friends, it would be easier for Miss Molly to transition into the facility. Miss Opal nodded. I'd love to show her. She slowly got to her feet, reaching for her cane. Come on, Molly. Miss Molly leaned on the arm of the chair and got to her feet, taking the walker Heidi offered her. She looked happier than Heidi had seen her in a long time, so Heidi knew this was where she needed to be. Heidi followed the two ladies, listening to Miss Opal tell Miss Molly all about the place and how much she loved living there. You'd be surprised at some of the good-looking men we have here. Don't let the silver hair, or lack thereof, throw you off. Some of them still have a lot of writing left in them. Heidi wanted to block her ears. She didn't need to know about what went on when no one was watching. Miss Molly laughed. I'm sure none of them can hold a candle to the young Dr. Heidi's currently writing. Did you know she got married last weekend? Miss Molly. Heidi said, shocked at the older woman's earthy speech. Every generation thinks they invented sex. I could tell you a thing or two about sex, Heidi. Miss Opal stopped at her door and unlocked it. I was married twice, you know, and I had lots of men in between. I was considered pretty wild in my day. I don't need to know that, Miss Opal. Sure you do. Miss Opal led the way into her apartment, showing Miss Molly every little nook and cranny while Heidi checked the text message she'd felt vibrate in her pocket. Missing you. Should be home on time tonight. I'll cook. Heidi grinned, wondering how she'd gotten so lucky as to end up married to the only kind doctor she'd ever met. She quickly texted him back. Sounds good. I'm touring the assisted living with Miss Molly. She's already made a friend. And I miss you too, but don't let it go to your head. She tucked her phone back into her pocket as the two ladies came back. Miss Molly grinned. Is that sweet husband of yours messaging you? He is. Are you ready to see the empty place that would be yours? Miss Molly nodded. I don't think I need to see it. I'm ready to sign papers to move in here. Heidi smiled. Good. Let's look anyway so we're 100% sure, but I'm so glad you like it. I like it, but I like Opal best. This is going to be a great place for me to make friends. And she told me there are Olympics every year with motorized kart racing. I'm going to win that. Does your Slade know anything about engines? Heidi shrugged. It wouldn't surprise me, but not to my knowledge. I'm going to need to find someone who can soup up an engine on my kart, so I can be a real competitor. No, you don't. You can follow the rules like everyone else. What's the fun of that? Heidi sighed, seeing Miss Molly was going to be a bad influence on the other residents. I'm going to have to assign 6 people to make sure you're not causing trouble here, aren't I, Miss Molly? You wouldn't have it any other way. Asterisk. When Heidi got home that evening, she found Slade in the kitchen making a stir-fry. She walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. How did I get so lucky as to marry you? He laughed. I have no idea. You must have done something good at some point in your life. She shook her head. You really are something else. He leaned down and kissed her sweetly. How'd Miss Molly like the assisted living? She met another resident as soon as she got there, and they became fast friends. She signed all the paperwork, and she's moving in next weekend. I'm going to need to help her. We'll help her together. She's such a sweet old lady. I'm glad she liked it. I think the big draw was the idea of there being people for her to hang out with. She's been lonely for as long as I've known her. She could handle it before, as long as she knew I'd try to stop in every day, or at least every other day. With me moving away, it made it a lot harder on her. Do you think she'll be happy there, though? Heidi nodded emphatically. Oh, yeah. They have Olympics there every year. Which reminds me, she wants to know if you know anything about engines. Engines? Yeah, sure. I worked on my own cars when I was in college. Slade frowned, wondering why Miss Molly would want to know that. Please keep that information to yourself. She wants you to soup up the engine on a motorized kart so she can win the races. He laughed. Of course she does. And you don't want this to happen? Heidi shook her head. Not at all. I never told you the whole story about the pickles, did I? No, you didn't. What happened with the pickles? I took her grocery shopping, and her legs weren't quite feeling up to walking. She's got arthritis in both knees, and she gets sore. Of course. So she rode one of the motorized carts. She asked me to pick out a couple of watermelons, and while I was doing that, she challenged this old man in another cart to a race. The next thing I knew, they had crashed into a pickle display, and there were more than 75 jars of pickles broken. The place stunk to high heaven. The manager asked the 2 of us to never return to his store. Slade bit his lip, obviously fighting back his laugh. That's terrible. Oh, go ahead and laugh. It was funny, but not at the time. I couldn't believe it. She really does need someone to keep an eye on her, and I've tried for the past 6 years. Doesn't she have any children? She does. She has a daughter who lives in Denton. She hires people to check up on Miss Molly, but she never makes sure they're doing their job. So they work for a few months, and then they stop showing up. And then I start watching out for her full-time again until her daughter can find someone else. I have to call her every few months to tell her to take care of her mother. Heidi shook her head. If I ever neglect my mother that way, feel free to yell all you want. The woman gave her daughter life, and she deserves respect for that. She does. He sighed. I wish I had an answer for her, but it sounds like the assisted living will be perfect for her. It will. There are daily activities for her to be involved in, and she already made a friend. They were checking out the butts of the men we walked past. He laughed. I can see that. She pinched my butt, if you'll recall. I think she may have bruised it. Heidi shook her head. I'm not going to kiss it better, so don't even go there. I wasn't about to. Although, she is your friend. She is, but I'm not responsible for her actions. I'm barely responsible for my own actions. She leaned against him. Thanks for cooking supper. I wasn't looking forward to figuring out what to make when I got home. We both work full-time. It's not your job to feed me. Tell me something, Dr. Henderson. What's that? He asked, one eyebrow raised. How did you stay single for so long? Heidi asked, only half serious. I have no idea. You'd think women would have taken one look at me and known what a catch I was, but they just didn't. They couldn't get past the fact that I look at women's girly bits all day, I guess. That doesn't bother me a bit. Does it bother you that I start catheters in men and change their diapers? Not at all. She smiled. That's why we're a good team. We are. I'm glad you're getting over the fact that I'm a doctor. I can live with it, I guess. Asterisk. Heidi and Slade spent Saturday getting Miss Molly ready to move. She had 20 years of clutter in her apartment, and Heidi tried to get her to let go of some of her possessions. Miss Molly, what are you going to do with this collection of bottle caps? You have 45 that are identical. They'll be worth something someday. No, they won't. I want to throw them away. I like them. They take up space, and your new apartment is going to be half this size. Heidi won that round, but lost the next. On and on they went all morning. The movers arrived at 1, and they took the furniture away, leaving Miss Molly's chair for last. As soon as that was loaded into the truck, Heidi looked at Slade. You stay here and help finish this. I'm going to take Miss Molly to her new apartment, so she can get to know her friends there. As they drove, Heidi talked a little about the routine. They serve dinner every night at 5. You can eat there or eat in your room. The choice is always yours. Do they feed us old people stuff, like tapioca pudding and jello? I'm sure they do sometimes, but not all the time. You'll be expected to cook for yourself for breakfast and lunch, so it might be nice to put up with old people foods once a day to avoid cooking. Oh, I like old people food. I hope they serve it. Those little jello cubes they always give you are perfect for putting on a spoon and launching across the room. Good way to meet men. Heidi shook her head. Miss Molly, please don't get yourself kicked out. I can't keep an eye on you as well anywhere else. Oh, I won't get kicked out. They'll never know it's me. Have you seen my innocent look? I perfected it in the 50s, and no one has ever been able to see through it. I'm starting to worry about whether or not the assisted living is a good idea for you. Promise me you won't do anything destructive. Miss Molly just laughed, saying nothing else. Heidi pulled under the awning at the entrance to the assisted living and helped Miss Molly into a chair in the lobby before parking again. When she got back inside, Miss Molly was sitting with an elderly gentleman, Mr. Richard, and the two of them were looking soulfully into each other's eyes. Heidi wanted to tell him to run, but she knew Mr. Richard, and if anyone could keep up with Miss Molly, it was him. Miss Molly had buried 2 husbands already, but Heidi loved the idea of her finding happiness one more time. She walked to the front desk to talk to the woman on duty. Miss Molly is moving in today. She'll be in apartment 27. Do you have her key? The girl nodded. Here you go. She signed all her paperwork on Monday. Heidi smiled. I know. I helped her with it. Is she your mother? Heidi shook her head. No, she was my neighbor for a long time and we've become close. I'm Heidi Henderson now. Sorry, just married. Oh. I knew I recognized you. You're the ADON. Right. The two facilities were pretty separate, even though they were the same company. Heidi had some influence there, but she wasn't as well known there as she was in the actual nursing home side of things. We'll take good care of Miss Molly. Heidi chuckled. I know you will. I'll be checking on her regularly. I'm sure she's going to love it here, though. She needs to have friends her age, something she hasn't had in years. Her daughter is her next of kin, but she won't check on her often, so I will. Good. She seems like a sweet lady. I'm glad you'll be looking after her. Heidi leaned forward. Do you know yet who's been assigned to her? The girl tapped a few keys on her computer. Looks like Jacqueline. Oh good. She'll work well with her. We're going to have to watch out for my Miss Molly. She can be a troublemaker at times, and she's always wanting to stir things up. We know her type. She and Miss Opal are already fast friends. Uh-oh. That doesn't sound good. I know. And it looks like she's about to jump Mr. Richard's bones. The girl, whose name tag read Abigail, laughed. We can't stop them from enjoying each other if that's what they want to do. I know. I worry about her. She walked back to the couple, noticing the two were smiling and holding hands. I see you made another new friend, Miss Molly. This is Richard. We're going to have supper together tonight. That'll be nice. I'm sure you'll have a good time. Heidi didn't ask if the supper would be public or private. She didn't want to know. I have your key, and I think the movers will be here any minute. You take care of that for me. I'm going to stay here with Richard. You don't want to decide where your furniture goes? Once it's in place, there's no one to help you move it. Heidi, I know you're perfectly capable of figuring out where my furniture should go. I'm going to enjoy my new friend while you take care of that. Heidi rolled her eyes. If there's anything you don't like, I'm going to remind you that you said that. She walked down the hall to the apartment to wait for Slade and the movers, realizing she was cramping Miss Molly's style with her new man. Slade and the movers were there a few minutes later, and the work resumed in earnest. Where's Miss Molly? Slade asked. She's falling in love with Mr. Richard in the lobby. Or they may have moved to his apartment by now. Things seem to be moving rather quickly between them. Slade shook his head. I thought she had feelings for me after that pinch, but I guess not. I'll have to tell her she broke my heart the next time I see her. You do that. Heidi took the box marked dishes and started to unpack it, stopping only to tell the movers where she wanted certain things to go. It took more than 2 hours, but when they were done, the apartment was unpacked and ready to be lived in. Heidi looked at Slade. I'm exhausted. Me too. Slade shook his head, thankful the movers were out of their way. Are we going to spend every weekend moving? I sure hope not. She walked to him, resting her head on his shoulder. Let's go find Miss Molly and tell her we're done. Then we can find some food. I'm starving. Sounds good to me. And tomorrow we're still having dinner with your parents, right? Heidi nodded. I wish we could get out of it and just rest, but my parents aren't going to feel better about our marriage until they get to know you at least a little. It won't kill us. No, it won't. It makes for a long weekend, but it won't kill us. He put his arm around her shoulders as they locked the door and left the apartment. Are you on call again next weekend? She nodded. Every other weekend. She walked toward the cafeteria, knowing that's where they'd probably find Miss Molly and Mr. Richard. When they got there, her eyes scanned all the tables, and she finally found them at a table off to the side of the room with Miss Opal. She walked to them, pulling the key from her pocket. Everything is ready for you, Miss Molly. I even unpacked for you. Miss Molly took the key with a smile. Thank you, Heidi. Now go away and enjoy your new husband. I've got friends here to check on me. Are you telling me to leave you alone? Miss Molly nodded. You can check on me, but I won't need you every day like I did before. Once a week would be nice. I'll miss you. Heidi laughed. Did you call your daughter and tell her about this? No, was I supposed to? Yes, she probably needs to know that you've moved. So call her and tell her. You two get along better than she and I do anyway. Heidi sighed. I'll call her tomorrow. I'm too tired today. Moving is hard work. Heidi leaned down and kissed Miss Molly's cheek. Enjoy your new friends. I'll check in on you Monday and make sure you're being treated all right. No one would dare mistreat me with you watching over me like you do. They all know you here. Heidi smiled. Have fun. Slade walked toward the parking lot with her. I rode over in the moving truck. Give me your keys. I want to drive. I can't stand not driving. I know I told you that. Don't be difficult. He stopped walking and held his hand out for her keys. Heidi finally acquiesced. You're going to have to ride with me eventually. I don't see why I would. I've avoided it so far. Chapter 9. Heidi slept in the next day, not waking up until after 10. She stretched and yawned, turning over to find Slade propped up on an elbow, watching her sleep. Whatcha doin'? She asked softly. Thinking about how glad I am we got married. He reached out and ran his hand down her arm. I can't imagine being this happy with anyone else. She smiled, moving closer to him. I could listen to you say more nice stuff if you want. He laughed. And that's one of the things that I like so much about you. You're not afraid to ask for what you need. Nope. I'm not. I like to call it delegating, and today you are in charge of telling Heidi she's fabulous. How about if I show her? Slade kissed her, pulling her closer to him. I think that's the best way we could start the day. Sounds good to me. Asterisk. Heidi walked out of the bathroom an hour later, toweling her hair dry. We need to be at my parents' house at 5. Then we need to figure out something to eat before then. Slade frowned at her. What are you hungry for? Tacos. You're always hungry for tacos. See? I'm easy to please. Send me flowers once a month and bring me tacos daily. I like shoes too, but tacos are the main thing I need in this world. Would you settle for barbecue? Because that sounds good to me. She shrugged. I can live with barbecue if tacos aren't an option. So we're going to go get some barbecue, and then we have to be at your parents' house at 5. What do we want to do in between those things? I think there's a new superhero movie out. I could go for that. Slade grinned. I figured you'd like chick flicks. I do. But I'm not going to force you to go to chick flicks. I'll go with my girlfriends when I need a good cry. Does that happen often? Does what happen often? Heidi asked, confused. That you need a good cry? Not too often, but it happens. Superhero movie? I would love to take you to the new superhero movie. Want to sit in the back row and make out? He asked. She turned away from him, getting her purse and walking toward the door. I don't know yet. I'll let you know when we get there. Slade grinned as he watched her walk toward the door. A sweet and sassy nurse was just what the doctor ordered. The movie was good, and they both enjoyed it. Afterward, there was no time to go home. Let's just go to Mom and Dad's a little early. That way we can get the interrogation over with. Heidi climbed into the passenger seat of his car. There's going to be an interrogation? She shook her head at him. What did you think dinner tonight was about? Eating? He sighed. A man can hope. Ever heard the term false hope? Because that's what you have going on there. False hope. So what kind of questions can I expect? She laughed. You can expect every question you've ever imagined. And then add a few dozen or so. You're kidding, right? Kind of, but not really. They're going to have questions about you. You married their daughter. They're going to want to know everything they can learn. This is going to feel like torture, isn't it? Heidi grinned at him, reaching over to pat his thigh. You'll be rewarded with sex with their daughter tonight. He sighed. I wouldn't get that if we didn't go. Probably not. You wouldn't have earned it, you see. Slade groaned loudly, but followed the directions of the GPS out of the parking lot and toward Fort Worth. Fine. I think. You may sing to me while we drive. I may? Oh yes. I like it when you sing to me. Is that a request or an order? Heidi looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. I've never given a doctor an order in my life. I know better. Sure you do. When they pulled into her parents' driveway, Heidi made a face. Mark is here. He's probably still laughing at us for getting married sight unseen. Last laugh is ours, though, because we're a good match. Maybe we should pretend not to be. Not with your parents watching. No, I think we'll just play it safe. Heidi made a face. But harassing my brother is so much fun. Nope. Not with me. Fine. They got out and walked around to the back entrance that the family always used. She walked right in, calling out, "We're here." Her mom came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. She looked Heidi up and down as if trying to decide if she was all right, before grabbing her in a hug. You're really all right. Heidi shook her head. Mom, he's a good man. I told you that. I know, but you were also refusing to come see me, so I couldn't be sure. I wasn't refusing to come see you. I moved last weekend, and I moved Miss Molly into the assisted living facility my nursing home runs this weekend. I really couldn't see you before today. I've been really busy. Her mother looked at Slade, looking him up and down. You don't seem like a social deviant. He's not. I promise. Heidi reached out to take Slade's hand, wanting a show of solidarity for her family. He even helped me move Miss Molly. Thank you for the dinner invitation, Mrs. Hart. It's good to finally have a chance to get to know you. Heidi waited for her mother to ask him to call her by her first name, but she didn't. Is Dad in the living room? He's watching a movie. We'll just go say hi to him. Heidi dragged Slade toward the living room, wondering where Mark was. She knew he was there, just waiting to do something stupid, because that's how brothers are. She sat down on the sofa with Slade beside her, waiting for her dad to pause his movie. So, the prodigal daughter returns. Prodigal daughter? Dad, I saw you 2 weeks ago. It's not like I left home to join the circus or something. Her dad wasn't paying any attention to her. His eyes were on Slade. Tell me about yourself. Slade shrugged. Not a whole lot to tell. I was born and raised in Boston. My dad died when I was young, and my twin brother and I were brought up by our single mother, who is a nurse. She's worked in oncology for as long as I can remember. Is that why you decided you want to be a doctor? I don't know. I've known since I was a teen that I wanted to help people. I first thought I'd be an oncologist and do my own research on the side, finding the cure for cancer. I realized as soon as I started medical school that I preferred to be around patients rather than test tubes, so I decided on psychiatry. That only lasted for a few months. I find real joy in helping a woman bring a baby into the world, so I stuck with being an OB. Her dad nodded solemnly. Do you want kids of your own? At least a dozen. Heidi gasped. He's kidding, Dad. She hissed under her breath, "He'd better be kidding." Slade grinned. "I'd like 2 or 3. Preferably at least one of each." "That sounds more realistic with Heidi for a wife." Her dad leaned back, still studying Slade as if he was a specimen under a microscope. "Will you care if your wife works, or will she need to stay home?" "That's up to my wife. I know her career is important to her. I can certainly support us if she wants to take a few years off to raise babies, but I wouldn't have a problem hiring a full-time nanny either." "Whatever is best for Heidi." Her dad's eyes narrowed. "You're answering everything perfectly. Did Heidi quiz you before you came over?" "How could I have done that when I didn't know what you'd ask?" Heidi asked reasonably. "He's just a genuinely good guy, Dad. He's a doctor." "You hate doctors." Heidi shrugged. "I'd never met a doctor like him. He's pretty special. Probably only because you've never worked with him, so he can hide that side from you." "Stop. He's a good man. I'm glad I married him." Her dad just nodded. "Okay." "Heidi said you live in Southlake?" "I do." "Any plans to move out of state?" Slade shook his head. "No, I really don't think I ever will. When I finished med school, I thought about moving back to Massachusetts, but my life is here now. I have a practice that I love. I have an incredible wife. Why would I leave?" Her dad nodded. "All right. I'm not convinced, but eventually I might be. Trust me. He's a good man. I've even been to his office, and his patients and staff all seem to like him." She started to tell her dad how good he was on a mechanical bull, but that just seemed too foolhardy. She couldn't imagine him being impressed by that. Mark came in then, sitting on the other side of Heidi. "How's married life?" "Fabulous," Heidi responded. "Really? So your blind date marriage worked out for you?" "Better than anything's worked for you." Mark made a face at her. "Slade, isn't it?" Slade nodded. "And you're Mark, right? How's marriage working for you? I see she's still alive and all, but you don't want to kill her?" Slade shook his head at his new brother-in-law. "Never occurred to me." "Huh. I'd have killed her. I wanted to kill her when I lived with her. That's the sibling thing. I kinda like her." "No accounting for taste," Mark mumbled. Heidi looked at her brother with a sweet smile. "Would you like Dr. Lachille's phone number? I'm sure she could find someone even for you. She's a miracle worker after all." "That's okay. I don't need to pay to find a date or a wife." "Of course you don't." Heidi kept the same sweet smile on her face, knowing it would annoy her brother. Mark backed off after that, and they had a nice visit with her family. Slade found that he liked them, much to his surprise. He'd expected to simply tolerate her family with the way her mother kept calling to make sure he hadn't killed her. As they left, they both hugged her parents. "Thanks for supper, Mom. It was nice not having to cook. I won't worry as much now. He seems like he's a good man." "He is. I promise." Heidi looked at her dad. "Less worried?" "Much. Don't be strangers." "We won't." They walked out to the car, and she collapsed in the passenger seat with a sigh. That was nerve-wracking. "Let's not do family again anytime soon." He grinned. Michelle and Seth were talking about driving up for Thanksgiving. "No family?" Heidi shrugged. "I kind of liked Michelle and Seth." "Sure, why not? What about your mom? When will I get to meet her? Maybe we can go to Massachusetts in the spring. It's beautiful there. I try to go every fall, but I don't think I can take the time off this year." "Whenever you're ready." "I really am glad that's over." Mark didn't like that we were happy. Heidi shook her head. That's not true at all. He just expected it not to work out, and he wasn't sure how to react when it did. He's a good brother, and he wants me to be happy. Of course, he has a peculiar way of showing it, but that's just because he feels like he's supposed to torment his baby sister. I'm ready to be home. She nodded. I'm exhausted. I feel like I could sleep for a week, and we have to go back to work tomorrow. I wish I could call in dead. But you won't, because you have a better work ethic than that. No, I won't. I just want to. Asterisk. After work on Monday, Heidi walked over to the assisted living to check on Miss Molly. When she got there, she found Miss Molly at a table playing cards with a group of others, including Miss Opal. She waved and walked to the table. How are my favorite people today? Miss Molly shook her head at her. Don't try to lie to us, Heidi. We all know your favorite person is that new doctor of yours. How do you like it here, Miss Molly? You should have told me about this place years ago. I love it. I feel like you've been holding out on me and trying to keep me from being happy. I have been telling you about this place for 6 years. Heidi responded indignantly. But you never brought me here to see it. If you'd brought me here, then I would have known how wonderful it was. It's your fault I've been alone for the past 6 years. Go away, Heidi. I don't need you now. Heidi shook her head, laughing. She leaned down and kissed Miss Molly's cheek. I'll check on you later in the week. Miss Molly's frail hand came up and hugged Heidi close. Thank you. I'll always be here if you need me. As Heidi left, she smiled to herself. She was both happy and sad. Miss Molly really wouldn't need her anymore, and she'd miss their friendship, but she knew the older lady would be so much happier where she was. She was already blossoming. Heidi hadn't seen Miss Molly made up with her hair fixed in years, and she'd looked like she'd spent at least an hour grooming herself. She was where she needed to be. She had just reached her car when she got a text from Slade. Delivery. We'll be home late. Maybe really late, but she usually goes fast. Miss you. Heidi tapped out a quick response, exhausted enough to be just a tiny bit happy to have the house to herself for a bit. I'm eating tacos then. I'll see you when you get there. Miss you more. When she got home, she ate her tacos, then took a long hot bath. She didn't know when to expect Slade, so she was going to plan for an early night. She wasn't sure she could keep her eyes open anyway. They'd been going a mile a minute since the wedding, and she needed a couple of weekends to rest. Asterisk. Slade was home shortly after 9, and he was surprised to see Heidi already asleep. He smiled, tucking the covers around her more securely before showering and climbing into bed with her. He promised himself they would do nothing at all that weekend. If they received invitations, they would just have to ignore them. He and his wife both needed the time to rest. He pulled her against him, knowing by now he wouldn't wake her if he did. She was a sound sleeper. He kissed her forehead and curled himself around her. He'd never dreamed married life would be so good to him. Heidi wanted to throw her phone across the room when it sounded the alarm the next morning. She'd gone to bed much earlier than usual, but it wasn't early enough, and she was getting downright grumpy from lack of sleep. She stumbled into the kitchen and started the coffee pot, and then jumped in the shower. When she stepped out of the bathroom 10 minutes later, Slade was standing there, holding out a cup of coffee as a peace offering. Mornings are hard. Heidi nodded, sipping on her coffee. I could use another gallon or 2 of this stuff today. Me too. I was surprised you were already asleep when I got home. What time did you get here? I was in bed around 8. I was so tired I couldn't keep my eyes open another minute. Just after 9, and you were out of it. Did you check on Miss Molly? Heidi nodded. She's fine. She told me to go away and then said I should have told her about that place years ago, so she could be happy, didn't you? Oh, I did. You know Miss Molly. He grinned. I do know her, and I'm not disappointed in that. How'd your delivery go last night? Good. It was a boy. Both mother and son are doing well, and he had all 10 fingers and all 10 toes. She smiled. How much did he weigh? 7 pounds 8 ounces. Healthy size. She finished her coffee and set the mug on the dresser, taking the 3 steps it took to wrap her arms around him and rest her head against his shoulder. I don't want to do anything with anyone else this weekend. Just you and me. And I want to be home 90% of the time. I was thinking that last night, Slade said with a smile as his arms closed around her. When I saw how tired you were, I knew that's what you needed. And what do you need? She asked. I need a weekend at home with my wife. Hopefully, I won't get called out all weekend. I'm back to having a bunch of patients due all at once. We'll make it work either way. She took her mug into the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee, sitting down at the table to enjoy it. I'm on call this weekend anyway. I hate making plans for call weekends, because I never know when I'm going to have to start calling around for a replacement for someone. Then we'll spend as much time as we can at home. I won't even try to talk you into watching me ride a mechanical bull. I thought my heart was going to come out of my chest last time you did that. Let's just never do that again. Ah. I like it. Heidi sighed. You're a grown man now. Imagine the headline. Idiot doctor falls off mechanical bull and breaks neck. What would I tell your mother? He shrugged. My mom's seen me do it. She reacted about like you did, actually. She's a very smart woman. Neither of us want to see you break yourself for the entertainment of others. You have no idea how many hours I practiced to get to where I could do that. I don't think I even want to know. Slade frowned. Maybe it's something you should know. It shows something important about me. Heidi looked at him curiously. What's that? That if I see something I want, I make sure I get it, and it doesn't matter what kind of personal sacrifice is required of me. He drained his mug and set it on the table beside him. And Heidi? I want your love for the rest of my life. He got up and quietly left the house, leaving her staring after him, her heart pounding in her ears. She did love him, and she'd have told him. Probably. She loved him, but she just didn't know if she could trust him completely with her heart yet. She needed to figure that out. Soon. Because she had a feeling if she didn't trust him soon, it would break his heart. Chapter 10. Heidi and Slade were both home early on Friday. Heidi sank onto the couch and rubbed the back of her neck. Have you thought about dinner yet? She asked, yawning. The week had just gotten more and more tiring. Miss Molly was fine, which thrilled her, but she really needed the weekend to just chill. He shook his head. Why don't we go get something to eat, and then we won't leave the house again all weekend unless we just have to. You mean like for groceries? He shrugged. We'll get them on our way home. We're going to lock ourselves in, and unless someone has the audacity to go into labor, you and I are hiding from the whole wide world. You have no idea how good that sounds. She walked toward her bedroom. I'll go change. He shook his head. Nope. We're going to go eat in our scrubs. Why? Because we are too tired to care about doing anything else. We'll go somewhere casual. She considered for a moment and finally nodded. If he didn't care that she was wearing her pink scrubs and had her hair in a ponytail, then she refused to care either. Okay, let's do it. She took the hand he held out for her and they walked out to the car together. She didn't even try to offer to drive, not because she'd given up on the idea, but because she was much too tired. They went to a chain restaurant and had just finished their meal when his phone rang. He sighed. It's the hospital. Swiping his finger across the screen, he answered. Dr. Henderson. Heidi watched as he responded, wondering how long this delivery would take him. He quickly used the kiosk to pay while he was still talking. On my way. He frowned at Heidi. We have two choices. Which are? You can come with me and drive my car home, coming back to pick me up when I'm finished, or you can wait for me there. I'll wait. She knew how he felt about his car, and really, she just didn't want to try and drive as tired as she was. Let's go. You're moving faster than usual. Something I don't know? Yeah, you remember the woman you met in the waiting room at my office? The one who said this was her third baby you were going to deliver? Heidi asked. Yes, her. Well, she likes to go into labor and have babies fast. Most women take 15 or more hours. She takes 2. And she waited for her husband to get home from work to go to the hospital. We have barely enough time to get there. I hope we have time to get there. Heidi grinned at that. I'm glad we didn't change out of our scrubs then. Slade looked over at her, seeing the tired lines on her face. I'm sorry about this. I really don't mind. I'll wait with the other nurses. It's always fun to sit at a hospital nurse's station. She really wanted to see him in action. She knew it was crazy, but seeing him and how he was with the nurses under him could break through a barrier for her. It would either tell her that he wasn't to be trusted or that he was as wonderful as she thought he was. When they got to the hospital, he went to the physician's lot and parked in a place reserved for someone else. You can't do that. Heidi protested. He's out of the country at a conference. Won't be back till next week, and his spot is closer than mine. He got out and started jogging toward the entrance to the hospital, Heidi racing to keep up. They were both breathing heavily on the elevator, and as soon as they got to the right floor, he hurried straight to the nurse's station. One of the nurses had a mask and gloves waiting for him, and he quickly pulled them on. This is my wife, Heidi. Who's with me tonight? I drew the short straw, said a young nurse with a grin. She hurried after Slade, telling him what room to go into. Heidi took her empty seat. You guys draw straws to see who has to work with him? She asked, wondering what kind of gossip she'd learn about Slade while he delivered the baby. Nurses always had the best gossip, and they were never afraid to say anything. The nurses all looked at each other and laughed. You're kidding, right? Whoever ends up with the short straw gets to work with Dr. Henderson. He's our favorite. We don't have a lot of rude doctors delivering here, but Dr. Henderson is the best. The nurse grinned at Heidi, who noticed her name was Bailey by the tag on her shirt. Really? Heidi asked. Y'all can tell me the truth. That is the truth, another nurse responded. I was with him late one night, and the baby just didn't want to come. The patient asked if she could get up and walk around, and he took her arm and walked with her, singing the whole time. He danced with a woman in labor. It was amazing. Heidi blinked a couple of times. How did the patient react to that? She started laughing, and the labor moved much faster after that. He thinks that if you can get the laboring woman to relax and forget her pain, even for a minute, that you've made her delivery special, and made it go quicker. How often does he yell? Bailey shook her head. He's never yelled at me. I've seen nurses do really stupid things, and he's never yelled at anyone. I've never even seen him angry. How much did he pay you to tell me this? The second nurse raised an eyebrow. I would be the first to give you dirt on any other doctor here, but Dr. Henderson really is special. He did his residency here, and there are even good stories from those days. He's just always been a nurse's dream. His mom is a nurse, and she's instilled a true love and respect for nurses in him. Heidi grinned. It was what she'd started to suspect, but couldn't really let herself believe. He really was a good doctor as well as a good man. Now she was going to have to eat crow and tell him how wonderful he was. And how much she loved him. She yawned. Probably not tonight. Maybe tomorrow night. Thanks for the information, ladies. Any of us would die for Dr. Henderson. We fight over who gets to call him to tell him to come in, and then we draw straws for who gets to help him during delivery. Does he know? Heidi asked. Bailey shook her head. He knows we draw straws, but I don't think he knows that we're all hoping to get to be the one to work with him. Heidi leaned back in the chair she'd taken, smiling. A phone rang then, and Heidi realized it was her on-call phone. She pulled out the schedule and on-call list along with it. This is Heidi. Heidi, this is Jessica. I just got home from the ER with my son. He broke his arm during football practice today. Well, why'd he go and do that? Jessica was one of their nurses, so it would be a bit harder to find a replacement. He was watching the cheerleaders, and he tripped over the bleachers. Can you believe? Heidi laughed. I can believe. I was in high school once too. I'll get your shift covered. Can you work tomorrow night? Or do you think you'll be off then too? I think I can handle tomorrow. I just want to make sure he's comfortable and can do for himself tonight. Okay, thanks for letting me know. Heidi looked at the nurses, who had resumed their own jobs. Sorry, my on-call weekend. Bailey turned to her, shaking her head. We all get it. Deal with your people. She looked down the list and found the nurse who was most likely to be willing to work and dialed her number. Susan, this is Heidi. Jessica's kid fell and broke his arm. Can you take her shift tonight? It's a graveyard. Absolutely. I'll be there at midnight. Thank you. I'll call and let Amy know. She hung up and then called the line for the charge nurse for the night. Amy, this is Heidi. Jessica has a kid with a broken arm. Susan will take her shift. Sounds good. Thanks for letting me know. Heidi hung up and dropped the phone back into her bag. Bailey turned around to look at her. That was easy. Heidi nodded. It was. It helps that all my people are healthy, and I'm not trying to cover 4 shifts at a time. I know how frustrating that is. Where do you work? Heidi named her nursing home. It's up in Northlake. I see. So how long have you and Dr. Henderson been married? We need the gossip on that. Heidi laughed. 3 wonderful weeks. How'd you meet him? Heidi wasn't sure how much Slade would want them to know, so she answered as honestly as she could without giving away too much information. We met at church. Bailey smiled. That's so sweet. It was magical from the first moment I met him. Slade came out a minute later, covered in blood. I'm going to go to my locker and change, and then I'm ready to go. Mom and baby? Both fine, and I made it before she started pushing. We're going to call this a win. 8 pounds 3 ounces, and that little girl is as perfect can be. He wandered off to change, and Heidi waited with the other nurse. Bailey smiled at Heidi. You want kids? Heidi nodded. I do. I really, really do. He'll be a great father. Honestly, I can't figure out anything that man doesn't excel at. He's pretty great. He's a Dr. Dreamy, that's for sure. Heidi laughed. Dr. Dreamy? That's what we all call him and have for years. So many of the nurses have thrown themselves at him, but I don't think he even noticed. That's funny. Heidi wondered why he hadn't dated one of the nurses at the hospital instead of calling Dr. Lachille. She'd have to ask him. Eventually. On the drive home, Heidi was quiet for a bit before she figured out what it was she wanted to ask him. Did you know the nurses draw straws to see who gets to work with you? Not who has to work with you. Slade laughed. They do not. They draw straws with all the doctors. Yeah, but it's different with you. They all love working with you because you're so good to them and the patients. Really? They told you that? His voice was filled with skepticism. They sure did. And they have a nickname for you. Oh, I don't even think I want to know what that is. Dr. Dreamy. They said just about every single nurse has been throwing herself at you for years. Why didn't you date one of them? He shrugged. I guess I knew there were some nurses interested, but honestly, I had no desire to date someone that I worked with. I like the separation of church and state as well. If you're looking at vaginas with me, then I really don't need to be looking at yours for fun. She laughed. I can see that. I'm glad I went with you. He looked over at her. You are? Heidi nodded. Yeah, all the best gossip comes from the nurses' stations. I don't even want to know. It was late when they got home, and Heidi was exhausted. She curled into a little ball on the bed, and Slade pulled her to him, shutting off the light. Sorry we didn't get the grocery shopping done. She yawned. We can do it tomorrow. Asterisk. Heidi woke before Slade did the next morning, and she immediately started planning. She wanted to tell him she was in love with him, but she wanted to do it in a big way. She knew he had feelings for her, even though he hadn't said anything, but he was waiting for her to tell him she felt the same. She slipped out of bed and went into the kitchen to start the coffee, realizing it was already after 10. She drank a cup, put her hair in a ponytail, and went to the store in shorts and a t-shirt after writing a quick note to Slade, letting him know she was going to let him sleep, so she was doing the shopping alone. Heidi had always been a good cook, even though she wasn't fond of it. She called his mother on her way to the store. What's Slade's favorite meal? Judy had to think about it. He loves spaghetti with meat sauce. And garlic bread. He could eat a whole loaf of garlic bread on his own. Then that's what he's getting for supper tonight. You raised a pretty incredible son, you know? I know. But thanks for reaffirming. I'm glad he's making you happy, Heidi. Are you pregnant yet? Heidi laughed. Not yet, but we've only been married for 3 weeks. Give me a few months. As long as you're trying, I'm happy. Oh, we're trying. Glad to hear it. Heidi laughed as she put the phone down, tucking it into her purse. A nice dinner for her husband and a good conversation was just what she needed. When she got home, she carried the first 2 bags of groceries inside, and Slade, who was awake, dressed and sitting on the couch watching TV, jumped up to take them from her. You shopped. Let me carry the groceries in. Heidi nodded. I'll put them away while you bring them in. He kissed her softly after putting the bags on the counter. Sounds like a fair division of labor to me. Heidi browned the ground beef while she was putting things away. She wanted to put the sauce into the crock pot to keep the house from getting too hot. She always hated to cook in the summer. She was glad August was almost over, and it would start to get cool before too terribly long. Slade carried everything in and looked over her shoulder. What are you making? I'm just starting something for supper. Putting it in the crock pot so we can laze around all day. Laze around with our phones at the ready to deal with emergencies. Heidi grinned, turning to kiss him. We're ready to take on all the world's challenges. He laughed. Or all the pregnant women and all the elderly at least. Go wait for me by the pool, and I'll be out in 20 minutes. He nodded, wandering off into the bedroom to change into his swim trunks. A day by the pool was exactly what he needed. Their day was uneventful, much to Heidi's surprise. No one called in, and he didn't have any deliveries. He called to check on his patient, but there was no need for him to go up to the hospital. Heidi fixed the exact meal his mother had suggested, leaving him to lounge by the pool while she got it on the table. When he came in and smelled the sauce, he smiled. "That's my favorite." Heidi grinned. "I know. I called your mom and asked her." He blinked at her a couple of times. "What a good wife you are." "No, but I plan to be a better wife in the future." "How could you?" She just smiled at him, taking her seat at the table. She waited until they were done eating, and she'd cleared the mess, refusing to let him help at all before she had the conversation she'd been wanting to have with him. She went into the living room and sat beside him on the couch, curling up with her head against his shoulder. "Thanks for making me my favorite for supper tonight. I really appreciate it. I won't say anytime, because I probably won't do it really often. But I wanted to do it tonight to let you know how much I care." She turned, looking at him. "I love you, Slade Henderson. I don't care if you're a doctor or a garbage collector. You are a good person, and that's all I wanted to make sure I got in a husband. You don't think I'm an egotistical jerk anymore?" She frowned. "I never really thought you were. I thought most doctors were. I didn't bother to get to know you before jumping to those conclusions about you, which was really unfair of me. I've worked with many of the doctors that you're talking about, and I understood from the first day we met why you felt the way you did." "You did?" He nodded. "That was why I thought it was so funny when you told me that you hated doctors. It made sense to me, especially when I found out you were a nurse. Thank you for changing your mind about me." "I didn't change my mind, though." "You didn't?" "No, you did. You showed me who you really are. I never dreamed I'd end up with a man half as wonderful as you are. Thanks for being patient with me while I got to know you." He smiled at that. "Well, it's not like I could leave. There was this little thing we signed." She made a face. "And that's the only reason you stuck around?" "Of course not. I saw you walking down the aisle toward me, and I knew you would be the perfect woman for me. Somehow, I just felt like we connected the instant our eyes met." "I did too. Until you admitted you were a doctor, of course. You made your feelings clear, but you never treated me badly because I was a doctor. You were an amazing wife from the first moment." Heidi sighed. "So you forgive me for waiting so long to tell you I love you?" Slade cupped her face in his hands, kissing her sweetly. "Of course I forgive you. I love you. Forever." Epilogue. Heidi put her feet up on Slade's lap, sighing when he immediately started rubbing them. "I needed that. Only one more month." "Do you think you'll be able to keep working the whole time?" he asked. She nodded. "I promised Vicky I'd at least try. And Dr. Slocum is pleased with me so far. I'm not having any complications. I just worry because twins come early." "I know they do, doctor, but ours don't seem to be doing so." He grinned. "Mom is going to be here in another month. She's excited to help out after the babies are born. And if she's not here right on time, my mom will be right there helping. Even Miss Molly has offered to help with the babies." "Oh, please not Miss Molly." She'd try to race with them in her lap. Heidi laughed softly. "She won the motorized cart race at the Olympics last month. I still think she found someone to soup up her engine, but she swears she didn't." "When are you going to start interviewing nannies?" Heidi shrugged. "Probably when the babies are 3 weeks old. I'm going to take a full 6 weeks off work if it kills all of us." "And it might." Slade smiled. "I hope you can handle it. I give you a week before you start worrying about everyone at work and feel like you need to go in and help out. I think the twins will keep me busy enough at home that I'll be able to resist." She wiggled her toes. "That feels so good." "I can't believe we're having twin girls," he said grumpily. "I wanted boys." She shrugged. "Not my fault. I'm just carrying them. You determine the sex." I know how it works. I'm an obstetrician, you know. I know. Just don't pass out during delivery. He laughed. No way. I'll be the calmest doctor that hospital has ever seen. Asterisk. Heidi held her small pink-wrapped babies and smiled at the nurse who had helped deliver them. Thank you so much. The nurse, Tanya, shook her head with a laugh. I still can't believe Dr. Henderson turned green and passed out on the floor of the delivery room. He's delivered so many babies. She looked over at Slade, who was slumped in his chair from utter exhaustion. He's the calmest doctor around in an emergency. None of those deliveries were his daughter's or his wife. Heidi sighed contentedly. He loves me, you know. You'd never know it by the way he talks to you, and about you. Heidi laughed. I'll tell him you said so if he ever wakes up. Are you sure you want to have them room in with you? We can take them to the nursery just for tonight. Heidi shook her head. No, I want them with me. Slade will wake up if I need him. Push the button if you need us. I will. Thank you. After Tanya left, she looked over at Slade, who had opened his eyes as soon as the door closed. I'm never going to be able to look the nurses in the eyes again. Heidi laughed. They all understood. They know it's just that you love us. He walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at the two beautiful babies in her arms. Are we still going with Samantha and Sarah? Yup. It seems fitting to give them both S names like you and Seth. It does. Heidi looked over at the table as her phone beeped, letting her know there was a message. That's the 8th text I've gotten in the last half hour. Would you check to see who it's from? Slade picked up her phone and glanced at the messages, laughing softly. He held the phone up. Say cheese. He snapped a picture before Heidi had even a moment to worry about her hair. What was that all about? Dr. Lachelle needed immediate pictures of her new munchkins before she died of anticipation. Heidi laughed. Of course, she did. That woman has serious issues. Isn't that what we love about her?